Shabbat Shalom, everyone. This is Parashah 9 we're going to talk about today, which in the English, in the Hebrew is Vayeshev. In the English, it means he continued living. So we're going to start talking more about Yaakov, but also the primary person in this Parashah is Yosef. So we're going to really start learning about Yosef and the things he went through and the importance of his story. So with that, let's go ahead and get going. All right, so picking up in chapter 37 of Bereshit or Genesis, starting in verse 1. So we see that Joseph's now grown up. He's 17 years old. And he's old enough to start giving some light administrative duties. So we start seeing that his dad starts putting him over certain things, and trying and and we'll see what those things are here in just a minute. So the text does emphasize that he was a youth. Now, usually whenever you see in parentheses or something gets put there that's kind of obvious, you wonder why they put that there. Why did the writer put something there that was obvious? Well, it was an emphasize, and the reason it was emphasized, at least in this case of him being a youth, is because of what his father would have him doing later. Okay, so this factors in. All right. So the text does say he was shepherding with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah. It does not say anything about the sons of Leah. And it's kind of interesting because later on, when he goes back, it's apparent that all of the sons are there. But for whatever reason, this time, it was only the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah. I don't know if they had different responsibilities. The sons did, where some did shepherding, other ones, or some did certain flocks. We don't know. But in this case, it seems that Leah's sons were not present. So when he was there shepherding with them, it says he was shepherding, but then it also says he brought home a bad report about them. So usually when you come home and bring a bad report about something, that means either they did something really egregious while you were, or they just weren't pulling their weight while you were shepherding, or you were supervising and you were bringing up a report about what they did. Now it seems if we go ahead and read on about the second encounter with his sons, where he goes out to actually check on them again, it seems he was actually supervising. If that's the case, that really brings into view why it was important to note that he is a youth, because his father, him being the second youngest besides Benjamin, he was the second youngest, and yet he's out there supervising the rest of his brothers. It also shows how his father favored him, because in putting him in charge basically over the rest of his brothers. So that became a point of contention, one of the points of contention between him and his brothers. And so it says later on, like we just talked about, that Yaakov or Yisrael loved him more than the others. Now, you would think by now that Yaakov would have kind of learned his lesson from this, that nothing good comes from favoritism. However, this is not, unfortunately, it's not what happened. Yaakov was still showing favoritism. His favoritism towards Leah caused, towards Rachel, caused a fight between her and Leah continuously. And now we see where he is favoring Yosef, and it's going to cause the same kind of fight and competition with his brothers. Now, it was so bad that Yosef's brothers couldn't even speak to him in peace. They couldn't even face him in peace. It was so bad. Their disgust of him was pretty deep, and they were extremely jealous. This was not a good family dynamic at all. Um, and so we're gearing up here for an explosive confrontation. It's all coming to a head here. And so Yosef has two dreams, and he goes ahead and tells the brothers the one, and then he tells all of them, including his father and mother. Well, not his mother, but his father and the rest of his family, the other. Um, And so each of these dreams will go on to further antagonize and provoke his brothers. And in the last dream, actually, he actually got a rebuke from Yaakov concerning it, even though Yaakov did keep it in mind. Okay, now it's interesting because if you think back to Rebecca and what God told her, she kept that in mind, and now we see Yaakov keeping this in mind. So Yaakov must have had some kind of inkling that there was something special about what was going on, about these dreams. They weren't just running no dreams. Not only that, but this dream happened twice, right? It was shown in one way and then was shown another, but both dreams meant the same thing. Now, in the word, when something is doubled, that usually means it's a sure thing. It's going to happen. And so maybe the sons recognized this because they were pretty incredulous about the fact that the dreams were basically saying he would be ruler over them. The actual text says king, um, and so they recognized this and they really didn't have an answer for it, except for jealousy, and it just enrages them even more. Now, there I it does not seem that Yosef told them the dreams to further enrage them. It seems that he just told them. Um, now we don't. Now the thing is, did Yosef know what they mean? Okay, and maybe he did. If and it's interesting because later on, Yosef interprets other dreams as well. So it may be that Yosef already knew what these dreams had meant. Now, why he would go and tell his brothers these things when he already knows that his relationship with them is pretty poor, I don't know. It may have been just bad, uh, bad social intelligence. It could have been a lot of different things. It did not seem, at least when I read it, I didn't pick up on any inkling that he meant in any kind of nefarious way. It just seems it might have just been not a very good decision. Um, Maybe he didn't see it as anything bad. He was just simply telling them what the dreams were. Um, but either way, he should have recognized that, hey, maybe I shouldn't tell them this because they're already mad enough of me as it is. In any event, he told them. They're completely enraged now. Um, and one thing I point out here in the bottom bullet, this entire parashah has a lot of very strong messianic overtones. So the Jews believe that the Messiah is you'll have two Messiahs. You have Messiah ben David and you have Messiah ben Yosef. And so if you see here, we start seeing, we'll see later how Yosef ends up saving his entire family. But before that happens, he's rejected by them and is not recognized as the ruler he's going to be. Now, this is interesting because the same thing happens to Moshe, and the same thing happens to Messiah Yeshua. Okay, and so if we're thinking about Messiah ben Yosef, then we know that that this is kind of a foreshadowing of what would happen with Messiah Yeshua. All right. So again, Joseph was not accepted by his brothers, and it just made things worse when he told them the dreams. Regardless of what his motives were, it made things worse. Um, so now we're in verse 12 of 37, and we see where Israel sends Joseph out once again to go see how his brothers are doing, how the flocks are doing. And so Joseph goes out and he looks for them in Shechem, where they should have been, but that's not where they're at. They end up he ends up being pointed to Dothan, which is where they happen to be. Now, whether they just didn't go where their father told them to go, or there wasn't enough grazing there for the flocks. They moved on to another piece of a plot of land. We don't know. So while on his way, the brothers plot to go ahead and kill him. They're beyond jealous. They're beyond enraged to him. They're to the point now they just want to get rid of him. So while they're doing this, Reuven, the oldest, tries to get them to not kill him and just instead throw him into a pit. So Reuven also wanted to teach him a lesson, but he didn't want to go as far as killing them. He said, "Hey, just throw him in a pit. That's good enough. He'll learn his lesson. He won't do it anymore." Right? It's kind of the gist you get from this. So while he's down there and bleeding, and this cistern was dry. There was no water at the time, and so when he fell in, it's a good distance down. I mean, it probably didn't feel good being thrown into that cistern, which is what it was. And so now if it had water in it, he may have, it wouldn't have been quite as bad, although he would have been wet and cold. But with it being dry and empty like this, when he hit the bottom, he didn't feel good at all. We don't know if he was injured or what. So you can imagine at this time, it doesn't say it in the scripture, but you imagine he's down there, crying out for him to let him out. Hey, this isn't funny anymore. I hope he's not saying wait till dad finds out. I mean, that wouldn't have helped his case any. But he's probably saying, this isn't funny anymore. Let me out. What are you guys doing? That kind of deal. But instead of doing that, they just sat down to eat. I mean, totally ignorant, totally ignoring him. They're to the point right now they don't really give a care what happens to him. So they totally ignore him and sit down to eat instead, kind of like just a leisurely, I'll sit down and eat, while they listen to him plead for them to get him out. So then Yehuda also advises him, hey, let's not hurt Joseph. He is our flesh and blood. But anyways, let's just go ahead and sell him, because they see these Yishmaelites coming in distance, and they're bringing their wares, whatever happens to be. It talked about various things they're bringing down to Egypt to sell, and so they go ahead and decide to go ahead and sell Joseph and get rid of him that way. That way, his blood is not on their hands. They didn't kill him. They just simply got rid of him. So one of the most egregious things about this, though, is that they sell him to the Yishmaelites. Now, Yishmael was Yitzchak's adversary growing up, and even today, it is Israel's chief adversary. So to sell Joseph to the Yishmaelites was really egregious. It's like selling them to their worst enemy. So it was not a good thing, and it's kind of the same thing that happened with Yeshua, right? So he was given over to the Romans, which were the absolute worst enemy of Israel at that time. All right. So it goes back and forth here, not just in this part here, but also a little bit later on, where it kind of conflates the Yishmaelites with the Midianites. And so it's either there were two groups. It was Midianites and Yishmaelites together, kind of working together to bring these wares down to Egypt, or the two groups that kind of intermingled, like where they had children together and things of that nature, and they're kind of considered the same. Okay, it could be one or the other. So, interesting enough, so Joseph's brothers sell him for 20 pieces of silver. Okay, Yeshua was also sold. He was sold for 30 pieces of silver. Again, interesting. These are a lot of different interesting parallels here. Now, we read that Reuben returned and found that Joseph was gone. Okay, absolutely horrified. He was gone. So at some point, Reuben must have left. He must have. We don't know why. But he went off to left. Maybe he went to go talk to his father and try to work things out. Um, or maybe he tried to and promised to bring Joseph back, or maybe he tried to get orders from his father for them to release him. We don't know, but for whatever reason, he was gone. And so he returns, and Joseph's gone. And so he starts freaking out. Okay, so he realizes that something. He's like, what's going to happen to me? He's gone. What's going to happen to me? Now, it could be. I put here that it could be maybe the firstborn. Him being the firstborn, he was going to receive the harsher punishment because he was more responsible. But at the same time, if he did actually go to his father to try to get things worked out and promise to work things out and bring Joseph back safe, and then finds out that Joseph's not there, now he's really going to be in for it because he pledged to bring Joseph back safe. So either way, Reuben is beside himself because of what happened with Joseph. So they decide to go ahead and cover up their crime by they kill a billy goat, and kind of with the blood they go ahead and smear the tunic in the blood, and then they go back to their father and present it as, hey, do you recognize this? And to Yaakov, it looks like that Yosef had been ripped to pieces and killed. And so he is completely devastated, and he vows to mourn to go down to his grave mourning. There was nothing that anybody could do to either then or later on to comfort him. He is just completely devastated. Now, we don't know how much his sons really cared at first. And the reason why I say that is because there was some bad blood going on here. They were not happy with their father that he favored Joseph. They really didn't care about Joseph because of what the dreams and things he had done. And so there was some not really good relationships going on here. So we really don't know if the sons really cared what happened to not just Joseph, but to their dad, whether they really felt bad causing their dad pain when he had favored Joseph. We don't know. Okay, but either way, eventually they do. Eventually they do at least care. Eventually, because they tried to comfort Yaakov, but again, like I said, he refused to be, and he said, "I'm going to go down to my grave mourning my son." All right, now we kind of segue a little bit, and it's kind of interesting where's this place. So we're in the story talking about Yosef. Um, and so now we segue into talking about Yehuda and Tamar, and then we pick right back up again afterwards, back with Yosef. So it's almost like it's a weird that this story was just planted there right in the middle of this overall narrative. But it does speak about Yehuda, at least at the time. So Yehuda, outside of all his other brothers, it seems to show, was very friendly towards the Canaanites. He actually got a friend. He actually got a friend from one of them, who this friend was not a good influence. And we don't know if he actually had this friend before or after what happened with Yosef. But this friend is not a good influence. Okay. And then we see where Yehuda went on to go ahead and take a Canaanite woman to be his wife. Now, if you remember, both Abraham and Yitzchak were very adamant about their children not marrying any of the women of that area. They were to actually go ahead and marry their kinsmen. That is not what happened here with Yehuda. And it reminds me also of what happened with Esau. Esau did the same thing, went ahead and married Canaanite women, and it wasn't a good thing. So Yehuda went ahead and marries his wife, and he has 3 children with her. So the first, is killed by the Lord for being evil. It doesn't mention what the evil was, but to actually be killed by the Lord for doing evil, it must have been pretty bad. Okay. Then the second, he is killed also, because when it's time for him to do the duty of a brother-in-law, which what that means is, at least over in the Middle East, at least way back then, when your older brother, or one of the brothers was killed, and he had a wife, and there was no children born to him, then so the lineage doesn't get cut off. It's the job of one of the brothers to take this wife as his own, and the first child born was to be the heir of the brother who was killed. Um, and so he doesn't do this. Instead, he go ahead and he does the deed, but then he doesn't actually do it to get her pregnant. And so God sees this, is unhappy, and he ends up getting killed also. And so now both sons are dead. Again, it's pretty extreme because you don't read about this anywhere else. I'm trying to think. I don't remember anywhere else so far in Bereshit and Genesis where this has happened, where somebody's just these people just dropped over dead because something evil they had done, and God struck them down for it. It's just very interesting. It must have been really, really bad. These two must have been very, very bad people. And it speaks to the fact of why Abraham and Yitzchak did not want their children marrying the women of the Canaanites, because it seems to me this is the type of children that end up being produced. And so God, and that's why they were emphasized not to do that. And so now we move on. So both of them are dead. And so now Tamar, which was Er's wife, who then was supposed to be Onan's wife, the second son, is now a widow twice over. Okay. Um, and so Yehuda tells him, hey, wait here in my house. Just live in my house until my youngest son, Shelah, is old enough, and then you can marry him. So after a long, it says many, many days, what the scripture says, a long time, um, Yehuda's wife dies. Okay, and so after he comforts himself, which usually means after he, sits in Shiva and actually sits in mourning for a while. We don't know if it was 30 days then or not. It could have been. He goes to his friend Hira, which is the Canaanite friend he made, and he goes to shear his sheep. Now, here comes a really confusing part. Okay, so Tamar, hearing that Yehud is headed off to Timnah to go ahead and shear his sheep, decides to take off her widow's clothing, put on regular clothing, wrap her face, and then go sit on the way to Timnah. It is really odd why she decided to do this. And so, seeing by the side of the road like that with her face wrapped, Yehuda assumes she's a prostitute, and and then asks her how much he can pay her to sleep with her, not knowing that it's Tamar, his daughter-in-law. And so they go through this big thing. He pledges to go ahead and give her a goat, but doesn't have it on right now. So he gives her collateral, which happened to be his staff and a couple other things. And then they sleep together, and she gets pregnant. Now, about 3 months later, I'm sorry, before that, Yehuda comes out and looking later to find her so he can pay her what he promised her, but he can't find her anywhere. And so he just decides to let her keep his staff and everything else, just so she has something, so he doesn't look bad to everybody else for not paying the prostitute. So about 3 months later, the people in the house, the servants, somebody discovers that Tamar is pregnant, and they assume that she's played a prostitute or played a harlot. Yehuda, hearing this, is really angry and decides that she needs to be burned to death. Now, when he sends people to go grab her, she presents him with the collateral, And he realizes all of a sudden that it was him. He was the man who slept with her. He's the father. So then it says, the last part of it, it says he acknowledged she is more righteous than him because he's without his, he withheld his son from her. So it's just really odd. So yeah, apparently Yehuda did not live up to his promise. He did not, after all that time, he did not have um, Shelah marry Tamar. And so Tamar's been sitting there his entire time alone as a widow, um, waiting for Yehuda to fulfill his promise, and he never did. And so I don't know what she hoped to accomplish by the stunt she played on the way to Timnah. But yeah, it's just odd. It doesn't really say what she hoped to accomplish. It just says that he never again slept with her, that she had the 2 children, and that was the end of it. It doesn't say that she ended up actually marrying Shelah. Maybe Shelah was already married, which is even worse. So now, if he's already married, then she can't marry him, and so it's just a really, really odd story, and it kind of showed um, that kind of showed Yehuda where he was kind of like uh, he didn't see that, and I know Abraham and Yitzchak would not have thought this way, and neither would Yaakov, to God to even think about going to sleep with a prostitute. But he went ahead and did so. He married a Canaanite woman. He befriended people from the Canaanites. He seemed very much opposed and doing the polar opposite of what his father Yaakov did. Now, we don't know if it's because of strains in the relationship. They come a number of different things, but whatever it happens to be, um, this is the path that Yehuda was going down, at least at this time. Okay? All right. So, so she ends up having twins, and it's kind of odd because it's kind of the same thing that happened with Yaakov and Esav. So, you have one twin come out, and then they go back, and the other twin comes out, and so that the twin that reached out second was the one that ended up being born, and the one that reached out first comes out second. So it's kind of an interesting thing, kind of the same thing that happened with Yaakov and Esav. Okay. Okay. So now we go back to Yosef. Okay. So Yosef is now in Egypt. He is a servant to Potiphar, who is the commander of Pharaoh's bodyguards. Now, the text is very careful to say, not just once, but a couple times, that Adonai was with him. This is important because he not only was he taken down to Egypt, away from his family and soul, but now he will also later be falsely accused of doing something he didn't do. Now, so while he's in Egypt, while he's in Potiphar's house, God has made him so capable and blessed everything he's done that everything he does succeeds. And Potiphar takes notice of that. He notices that he can trust Joseph with anything, that everything Joseph does works fine. And so he puts Joseph over his entire house so much he doesn't even think to do anything except the food he wants to eat. Everything else is taken care of by Joseph. Okay? Now, this doesn't happen once, this happens twice. We're going to see the second occurrence here in just a few minutes. So, Potiphar is not the only one who notices how great Joseph is. Potiphar's wife also takes notice of Joseph, but not because of what he does for the house. She takes notice of him because he's handsome and young and everything else of that nature. And so she tries numerous times to get him to sleep with her. And each time he's like, no, your husband put me over your entire house. I'm not going to do such a wicked thing. So Joseph keeps his integrity the entire time. And so finally, desperation, frustration, or whatever happens to be, Potiphar grabs at him. Okay, and so when she grabs at him, she grabs a hold of his garment around him, and he just lets it go and flees and runs up out of there, runs out into the field or outside the house. And so she's left with his garment in her hand. So I'm guessing at this point she is so frustrated and angered by his rejection that she goes for revenge. Now she goes ahead and accuses him to the servants and eventually to her husband when he gets home that that Joseph tried to take advantage of her, which again was a complete lie. But she was so angered and frustrated by his rejections that she went ahead and framed him. So Potiphar, being the husband, is in a has a fit of rage and has Joseph thrown into prison. Okay, so now not only was now he got first he was taken to Egypt, made a servant. Now he's a prisoner. Again, however, even in prison, God gives him favor, and the commander of the prison takes notice and puts him over everything to the point to where the commander didn't worry about anything happening in the prison because Joseph was over it. Okay, so pretty much everywhere Joseph goes, what he does well. God's with him, and everybody takes notice. All right, so now we're in chapter 40. At some point, the Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker are thrown into prison also because they did something to offend Pharaoh. We don't know what it was, but they did something that peeved Pharaoh off, and he threw him and had him thrown into prison. Remember, Pharaoh's king. You do anything kind of thing to offend him, and it's really easy for him to snap his fingers, and you're thrown into prison. Okay, so during their time in prison, both of them have dreams. Each of them have that dream the same night, but they have no idea what they mean. And so they're depressed the next morning. They can't figure out what these dreams mean. The dreams are disturbing to them, and they're kind of being depressed about it. They must have been the dreams. They must have known dreams meant something, and that they couldn't, and that it may have been even not very good dreams. And so they were upset about it. Now, also remember that at this point, Joseph was also their personal attendants. Okay, and so Joseph's been around them for a while, and he must have earned some kind of trust with them. And so, he asked them, what's wrong? Why are you so downcast? They're like, we had these dreams, and we can't figure out what they mean. And so Joseph, awesome, he gives God glory and said, hey, doesn't interpretation belong to God? Why don't you go ahead and tell me what those dreams were? And so saying that, we're reminded again. So Joseph's offering to interpret the dreams. We gather from this that God has gifted him with the ability to interpret dreams. Now, if this is true, this gift may have also extended all the way back to when he told his brothers the two dreams he had. Okay? So, and he recognizes God has given the ability. He gives God the glory for it. So, hey, God's the one who interprets the dreams. And he knows that God will use him to interpret them. So Joseph interprets both. And the cupbearer is overjoyed because he's going to be restored. But the baker, unfortunately, ends up being executed later. Okay. So Joseph says, "Hey, don't forget the kindness I've shown you by interpreting your dream. Please tell Pharaoh about me and have him get me out of this prison." So everything happens just as God enabled Joseph to interpret, down to the very last, /T and dotted I. So the cupbearer was restored to his position, and the baker was executed. But it says pointedly but the cupbearer forgot about Joseph. Okay, so unfortunately, Joseph's good deed was not returned to him, at least not right away. We'll see later that the cupbearer does eventually remember him, but unfortunately not when Joseph would have liked him to remember. So, and now I can kind of understand with the cupbearer. I mean, you imagine if you're the cupbearer, you're standing for Pharaoh who has the power to kill you or keep you alive. The last thing you're thinking about is Joseph. Then all of a sudden you're restored to your cupbearer position, and you're overjoyed you're alive and get to serve the Pharaoh again. Again, you're not thinking about Joseph. And so eventually he does, but it's not at this point. All right, so that is the end of Parashah 9. I hope that you enjoyed going along with me in studying it, and I hope that you will take time to read it for yourself. I will probably, this has kind of become a pattern here. I think this is kind of how it's going to work out from here on out, is I'm probably going to go ahead and do these videos probably at the end of Shabbat, or maybe shortly thereafter, when I have time to do them. And so again, you may have already read this. Great, I hope you did. But if you haven't, please go back and read the Parashah 9, so that you can also, glean from it yourself, not just taking what I say. All right. So as always, if you need prayer, please send it to that email address right there, and I will go ahead and definitely pray for you or anybody else that you've asked to be prayed for. Please make it anonymous. You can give me your first name. I don't need anything else other than that. I don't need all particulars of what you're praying about. I want to, just give me enough to go ahead and pray for. So, all right. Again, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope to see you next time. Brachot, and have a great week ahead. Shalom.